The topic for today is going to be what I learned from the Italians in terms of being fit and living a fit lifestyle. So again, I was in Italy, the past week, I guess last week, for 6 days, had an amazing trip, but I saw that, people here are like on more average, pretty darn fit. It was pretty cool to see. And I'm like, what is it that sets, Italians apart? And I think that if you've traveled, here and there, in Europe, you tend to see, different lifestyles and like kind of what's going on here. Because, pasta, pizza, those are big things for, what we see when it comes to Italian food. So like, how do they start on fit? Because I hear quote unquote carbs are bad. So we're going to go over a couple things that like I saw, noticed, and then also like I did a little bit of research on it of like, what's the deal? So to start things off, in terms of like a little bit of my research, in terms of obesity rates, America is number 11 in terms of in males in terms of obesity rate. So we have around 42% of adult males are in that BMI over 30. Of course, I was obese like I think 2 weeks ago before I started my mini cut, but like that muscle is still counted in BMI. So I mean that can be also a confounder in the US because I feel like we may have more of a lifting culture. So lean body mass is in the BMI equation. So it's not perfect, but it's something we got. And then in Italy, the obesity rate is like 18% in adult males. So less than half. So I thought that was very interesting. And so we can also say, in part that's going to be due to, maybe the lifting culture isn't as big in Italy. So lean body mass, it's a contributor in terms of body weight. That's one thing. But there's 5 things that I'm going to go over that I found very interesting when I was, doing a little bit of research and just reflecting on this. And then also, what are the things we can take from the Italian culture that we can implement in our own lives to, be as fit as possible? So let me share my screen. We're going to go over what I learned from the Italians about staying fit. So number 1, we're going to go into my first one is going to be higher carbs, but less fat, seemingly. So what I saw while in Italy is that, they tended to, what I thought is they tend to consume more carbs. Well, actually, we can probably just say that. And again, the comparison I'm going to say is like general American diet. And so they eat more carbs on average. They have pasta, pizza. When I went out to restaurants, those are a lot of the standard. You get bread before your meals. It's like carbs, carbs, carbs. Also, interesting enough, Japan probably is the highest per calorie of the diet in terms of those calories being from carbs. And they tend to have, I think they have like a 4% obesity rate as far as I last checked, but that was like 5 years ago. So I'm not sure anymore. I got to fact check myself. But is carbs the problem? And seeing by this information, we can't just blame carbs. It can't just be carbs if these countries with higher, more carb-rich diets are having lower obesity rates. So what can we learn here? So Japan's my first example of like, okay, so it's not just Italy that has, the secret, was it the fountain of youth or the fountain of shreds, and they can eat all the pasta they want, but like Japan as well is going to be in this category. And so what I saw when we went out to eat is like, it's a lot of pasta and sauces, a variety of sauces. And then also it's a lot of times you always have the option for like a thin pizza. And the way they did things is like, there's like, I think it said like, I'm going to get to some of these things wrong, but it was like meal 1 and meal 2. And that's how they separated some of their menus. It seemed like the meal 2 options often maybe had like a meat component, a little bit heavier. And that, that first meal component was more of like, okay, it's just plain pasta and some sauce. So it really depends, of course, what you order. And so one thing that I found interesting is like, generally, if you're just getting the pasta and red sauce, like it's not too calorie dense. It's just, carbs is going to be like, it's dough. And then you're going to have, carbs as sauce. I mean, there's also a fair amount of olive oil that we would see over there as well. And interesting enough here is when it comes to also the thin pizzas is I can even show you a photo, like the amount of calorie density in an American pizza, we just have a lot more cheese and the dough we use is much thicker. When you have like a pizza that is in actual Italy, it tends to be thinner and tends to be lighter. So here are 2 pizzas that I ate myself in Italy. So, wow, that's not really coming out good. Well, we tried, but as you can see, there's not that much cheese. There's a large like crust area, and it was very light and kind of bubbly. And so Macros are all done in terms of grams, which is a weight component. So if a food is actually light by weight, it tends to be less in total calorie density, which I find very interesting as well. And so when it comes down to this, like if you have less bread thickness, less cheese, because the cheese is the most calorie dense piece because it's high in fat, and like that, I think is reducing, overall calorie density. In the pastas, it tends to be, more of the sauces tended to be, I guess, like a plain tomato sauce. You pay extra to get burrata on it, which is just another word for like mozzarella cheese, apparently. I Googled it. That's what Google said. I think burrata is like a fancy mozzarella, but a delicious mozzarella. So that was interesting as well. And, as far as like your fatty sauce options, like you have carbonara, which is going to be like an adult mac and cheese, which it was delicious. However, there can be some oily food. Some of the meals that we did have they did have like a drizzle of olive oil at the end. And that was when we were in Venice, it was higher, more seafood more often. But my overall point here is kind of like what we can learn from the Italian kind of way of eating in terms of like having a lower obesity rate. One thing to take away here is it doesn't sound like carbs are the quote unquote enemy. And this will bring me to the second point, which is so counter to myself, it's just like an interesting observation. And then I'm working my way back through the logic of it. So the second thing that I saw here is going to be less meat. I'm going to make the vegetarians so happy. The vegans are probably so happy. Kevin's like, okay, they're leaner. They eat less meat. But, your boy still, I still have my chicken breast. I still have my steaks. But, like, what is it here? So what's the dealio? Is it because meat equals bad? Just like as we thought, carbs equal, quote unquote bad. But when it comes to the meat component is when we were dining out and stuff, especially like traditional like Italian type kind of food places, I just saw like less options in terms of like meat. There was like, you don't have your cheeseburgers, you don't have a ribeye steak. You're not going to have many of those options. Because if we think to the, generally in America, like what are the readily available and most highly consumed foods that we have that are meat containing? It's hamburgers, which are high in fat content. It's not a lean burger. Ribeye, the highest fat steak because they're delicious. Also, it's tending going to be like fried chicken in the way of, chicken tenders, chicken nuggets, etc., or like, probably some kind of fried and drenched in dressing or sauce kind of, situation. Or like a sandwich that's covered in mayonnaise. So a lot of these things I found it interesting that just generally there were less, just meat sources overall. And so does that mean meat is bad? Not necessarily. But like when we see in America, I think it's just more plentiful, readily available to consume more meat. I also find it more easy to find, grilled chicken and those kinds of things, especially if you do have, physique kind of goals, because protein is great for improving your body composition by having resources to build muscle with. So I don't think protein equals bad, but the general kind of protein consumption and go-tos in terms of meats that we see in America are going to be more highly calorie dense because they tend to be fried, less lean cuts, or as far as like a hamburger, it's like 30% fat. So that's like for like 20 grams of protein, it's like, I think it's like 200, 150 or 200 calories worth of fat. So it's really, really stacking that up. And then you have it on a sandwich with bread, mayonnaise, and often like bacon, also not another lean meat. So it stacks up a lot of those calories. So in Italy, when you cut out an entire kind of, macronutrient pretty much, I just found, I'm not going to say it goes to complete zero, but it was just harder for me to kind of find, those readily available like meat sources. I just think like the protein consumption on just like a general average is probably going to be lower than that of America. And then that in America tends to be, if you're not tracking your food, or you just like me growing up when I didn't know much about nutrition, I just thought a hamburger or a meatball, all of them are proteins. A sausage, it's a protein, but they tend to have high amounts of fat. And it's going to stack up the calories. So that was something I noticed as well, which is pretty interesting. And one time I did pay to have grilled chicken on a salad. They did me dirty at one restaurant, but like we went to a higher, more expensive restaurant, and I think it was like a $25 Caesar salad. One Caesar dressing is not as the Caesar dressing we have in America. It was yellow. I think I have a picture of this darn salad. And then I think I got like paid extra to have chicken on it. And like, again, like the photos aren't really working on here, but you can barely see what that is. But it looks like kind of like honey mustard, but like the dressing didn't have much taste. And that was like a $25 salad. And that's probably like 2 ounces of chicken on there. Like it wasn't much, even when you do have something that is even having a lean protein on it. So interesting thing there that I just think protein intake, protein does contain calories, be that for what it is, but less meat consumption overall. Florence, though, did have the steaks. They had the filet, delicious out there. But that being said, just not a lot of, sausages, hot dogs, hamburgers, kind of that stuff. So it tends to be higher in calories, but like has a protein, source. So that was something interesting that I did see. And we're going to go into number 3. And I think number 5 is one of the biggest ones. And I think it's going to be one of the most useful. So kind of, and I'll reverse engineer some recommendations coming out of, what my experiences were. And number 3 is activity. So let's look at activity level in Italy versus like the US. Do they have a higher activity level? And let's point out my bias. I was in Rome, Venice, and Florence. These all are pretty much cities. That means people tend to be in cities. They tend to walk around a lot, get place to place because it's just hard to get, a taxi or something, place to place. But I generally did see a lot of walking around the ruins, but like that's often like just the tourists that are visiting. So can't say that's necessarily Italian culture. But overall, so I was confused or I was curious. So I Googled this. I was like, what is the general step count of someone in Italy versus someone in the US? And interesting results on that. So in Italy, Italians tend to average 5,300 steps per day versus in America, apparently we average 3,000 to 4,000 steps per day. And so that the difference in calorie burn, it's about a difference of like, let's say 2,000 steps per day. That's only 100 calories burned difference. So it's an only, but also, that still adds up over time. Like, I don't like when people tally up like a whole, like if you ate 10 calories less per day in a year, you ate what, 10 calories less. Yeah. That's a whole pound of fat you would lose in a year. It's like, no, it doesn't really work like that. But in the way of this, like in a month, like, yeah, in 5 weeks, you'd lose an additional pound by that same logic because you burn 3,500 calories, you burn an extra 100 calories per day, 5 weeks, 35 days, 3,500 calories. That's a pound. But I don't think it works out like that, but that's just interesting. So they're a little bit more active, but actually relatively, it's almost like a 2x or a 1.5x increase. So actually it could be, depending how you think about it. I was also, again, I talked about, I was in heavily touristy areas, but also I did check out for the gyms. I didn't go training because I have a pretty beat up elbow. So I took the time to actually take a week off of actual training, did some jogs, did some running. But I didn't pick up on a major like gym culture over there that I did see. Just, kind of seen there. I haven't seen on the bodybuilding scene, correct me if I'm wrong, I would love to see them, but like major Italians in the IFBB or any competitive, physique sport. And when I was in Rome too, just finding the gyms, most would open, I think it was like 10 a.m. on the weekends. And I think there were later openings on the weekdays as well. So for me, and just like, it didn't really make sense for me to, hey family, I'm gonna go train at 10 a.m. So you guys gotta, hold off your day until I'm finished getting a juicy pump. So I just like kind of, all right, I got an injury. Let me just like take the week off. But I didn't pick up on too much of that. But what can we reverse engineer from that? Is 2,000 calories step difference that robust? I think it's useful to have that extra 2,000 steps. That's another 100 calories per day. And, for others, that could be pretty impactful. And then also in other ways, it's not that impactful. But that is kind of what I saw in that activity difference. And also, again, like if you go travel somewhere and, people are walking around because there's all these cool things to see, remember, you're probably in the touristy areas. There's that incentive. Like you got to really evaluate what is the standard day for, a certain area, certain population, for really evaluating, cultures and traditions in terms of like, what can we learn from that? Now, next up, we're going to go to point number 4. This one actually, this plays into number 2, how like they kind of we have far less protein intake. So just generally leads to less calorie consumption. Number 4 is similar. So from my experience, it looked like they tend to have light breakfasts in Italy. It tended to look like light breakfast was what was going down. Like for me, I was trying to find places where me and my group, it was my wife, her parents, me, my parents, and I was trying to find somewhere like, hey, can we go sit down, have like a nice little breakfast, and then get our day going? But it was more rare to find those from my experience. There were places that had crepes. If you find them, avocado toast, it's out there. Little omelets, but I feel like it was rarer to find those. I had to go on Yelp and find those spots. We found some I think we went to, we had an incredible breakfast spot in Venice. And I need to get on Yelp and like review all these places, but that place too, it gave like, it was lox and like avocado toast. But I feel like we had to go out of our way to find that. I think the general, and our last day in Venice, we just like went to like where we saw most people going to. It was like a coffee bakery type place. You go in there and we're like, can we have some cappuccinos to go? And then also, oh, okay, that pastry over there looks pretty good. And so like a pastry and a cappuccino, it sounds like, whoa, you're having a pastry in the morning. But like if you had one donut and like a cappuccino, and like donuts are highly calorie dense because they're also drenched in fat because they're fried. Like, let's say that's 300 calories. Cappuccino, let's say that's like 60 calories. Is 360 calories going to break the bank? And what it looked like to me is like people would be pretty light on the breakfast. Maybe they just go with the cappuccino. They're on the go. I don't know if like breakfast was just like not a big thing. In America, me and my sisters, we meet up at IHOP every quarter. And like, I'm getting some pancakes. Syrup is like super dense in calories. Give me the omelet. Give me the cheese with that. Throw the bacon on there. I want some biscuits. Give me the hash browns. You know what? Scratch the home fries or hash browns. Let's trade it for French fries. So like you can see here, like there are options for getting those highly dense breakfasts here. And I think that just like if I were to say like one meal, and when I travel, here's a rule I use for anyone traveling that wants success with keeping weight off or losing body fat. Got a tip for you. What I like to use is 2, not 3. So what this means is typically we have 3 big meals, and you're usually pretty busy when you're traveling. So what I even did, I knew that we had 2 good places where you're going to eat later. I was like, all right, let me just have a cappuccino for breakfast. And now I just have like 2 meals. I'm a larger person. I may have jogged that day, and I know we're getting a lot of steps. These 2 meals is like all my calorie consumption is going to be. So it's going to be harder for me to reach a surplus. Maybe you have 2 moderate days or meals, and then you ball out on the 3rd meal. But 2, not 3 just means don't ball out on all 3 meals and with a dessert. So like don't have high calorie density in like all 3 meals. That's how you're going to come back and be like, darn, how did I gain 5 pounds? It does happen. There's delicious food that we don't always have access to when we take vacations. However, that being said, 2, not 3 usually works very well for me. Keep that first breakfast light, or if you have a really indulgent breakfast, then probably fast through lunch, have something very light, and then dinner, spend more of those calories. That is something I've seen work well for me, for our clients in HFP. And that's kind of like what I use. And that's what I went there. I took a week off of training. I did some jogging and I came back the same weight, 228. So take that for what it's worth. But again, rare to find big omelets, toast, pancakes, syrups. Often it was like small omelets if we could find that, or just quick pastries and like coffee. Also, it's pretty hard to get like American coffee. So my parents are huge coffee drinkers. So like they were like, when they asked for a coffee, they got the little thing of espresso. Like that was definitely like a culture shock as well. But yeah, you ask for Americano, which is espresso. I think they just water it down. But interesting stuff. So we're going to go into number 5, which is going to be probably my favorite one. Let me screen share you. So this is my biggest tip. And this is something I think we can really learn from and use in America. So number 5 is going to be small spoons. Small spoons. And then this also goes into portion sizes. And so this one, I think really, it really knocks it home. And I think that this is probably the big piece here. And what I want to start by is like, I wanted to say that gelato is different than American ice cream. Like, oh, it's because I even see places say like, oh, it's less calorie density, et cetera. It's more aired, it's more fluffy. And that may be true. But when I looked at it online for like 420 grams of like Ben & Jerry's ice cream, it's like 1,200 calories. And the same like 420 grams of like plain vanilla gelato, I think it was like just around 800 calories. Yes, that's robust savings. But I was also looking at like Ben & Jerry's, which is probably the most dense ice cream I can find. Yes, you could say that like who's stopping short of eating the entire pint. But, in Italy too, getting gelato, like there's still some calories to that. So kind of like reverse engineering that, like I thought that would have a greater difference. But what I think is even more interesting, because I had 10 gelato stops in 5 days. That was one of my missions going there. I just said how like I do the 2, not 3, but also like we were hitting 20,000 steps per day. I was trying to get some jogs in, but also like I was kind of manageable on my meals. But that all being said, 10 gelato stops in 5 days. Try to beat that. Anybody, bring it on. But all that to say, small spoons. the small spoons, the gelato spoon you get, I don't have one with me, but they were very small. It's like this little tiny shovel. And then like in America, we got these big spoons. And this is if you're a bodybuilder, you may have used this strategy, but I use baby spoons, not literal baby spoons, but the spoons I use when I'm eating, I use the small ones. I don't use the soup spoons. I get the smallest spoon I can find because it's going to make it makes it last longer, whatever you're eating. And it's just like, yeah, it takes more time. And that tends to be helpful because there is a time delay from when we are actually full. And then for our mind to, realize that satiety, realize that we're actually full. So kind of when you slow yourself down eating, that's useful. So I think with gelato, we have those small spoons. They also, I think the bowls they serve them in are smaller than what you would maybe get in America. So that's interesting. And then maybe there could be something to the gelato calorie density. Like I'm talking grams in terms of weight, but if it's airy and fluffy, it may take up more volume rather than, maybe actual ice cream from America, Ben & Jerry's, Hejnasty. Those tend to be pretty, more compact, more dense in fat content. But also on that, I reviewed the footage on this, and because I also added in portion sizes, and I think Italians are the OG flexible dieters. I think they get in the good stuff. They get in some gelato, they get in some pasta, they get in some pizza, but it's all, I think, portion moderated. So let me show you guys what a serving of pasta looked like. And you can see my fork is kind of hidden in there, but I think this was cacio pepe. So that means like cheese and pepper. And then also, this was probably one of the best pastas we had. This was kind of like a basic kind of, I think that's burrata on top. And that looks so good. I can see that. That looks so good. Yeah, that was awesome. But like, it's these big bowls, but then it's like this little bowl within the big bowl. And like, that was your serving. I think in America, you're often going to get for a pasta dish 2x that. And like, Cheesecake Factory. Yeah, me and Nicole go to Cheesecake Factory and usually get like a bigger portion size than that. But overall, I would say portion size, I think they kind of moderated that for the most part. So if there are some things we can take away here, let's reverse engineer kind of, what are the takeaways from this? Like, what are the actual things that I learned that you guys can maybe implement to stay fitter longer? Because that's what it's all about. We want to be, fit and jacked. That's the game plan. So when it comes to what I learned from the Italians about staying fit, because they have, less than 50% of the obesity rate of the US. Number one is they tend to have higher carbs, but it appears they may have less fat, but also less protein. So what this means is carbs are not the entire enemy. Portioning out, moderation, and of course, calorie management matters. It's not just the carbs. Otherwise, Japan and Italy wouldn't be relatively lean on average. Number two is they eat less meat. What are we going to take from this? I would probably say they eat less fatty meats. So I'd say, how can we utilize this here? I wouldn't say avoid all meat, avoid all protein, etc. For ethical reasons, if that's what you want to do your thing. If you want to abstain. But as far as, what are the most common meat sources eaten? Let's say like hamburgers, meatballs, sausage, etc., fried like meats. So I would say that if you keep it to, chicken breast, London broil, pork tenderloin, the leaner cuts of meat, you're going to be able to get your protein in and keep your calories managed. Because again, calories are what matters here. Activity level, they beat us by around 2,000 steps per day. I don't think that that's like the major one thing. But, getting your steps up a little bit is going to be helpful. While I was there, we got 20,000 steps, but I'm a tourist. I was a tourist. I was walking around checking out sites. So you can't really count that necessarily. Number 4, light breakfast. I think that the takeaway from this is when you're doing your 3 meals, have one be lighter than the other 2. Like you don't have to ball out every meal because 3 times 1,000 is 3,000. If you have meals 1 and 2 are light at 500 calories, meal 3 is more higher. It's 1,000 calories. You already just reduced, 1,000 calories intake. So I think there's something to, having, a lighter meal of maybe your 3 meals. Number 5 is going to be small spoons. So portion sizes. And the cool thing was, you can have your pizza, you can have your pasta, but the portion matters. Portion size matters. Like a Pizza Hut deep dish slice of pizza, it's going to be different than, the pizza slices that I had in Italy. Super thin, super light. And so it's not going to be having too many calories. And then also, if you are dieting, you want to get the most out of your food. most satiety, most time, smaller spoons. Get the baby spoons. Get the baby spoons. And that's going to do it. So those are the 5 takeaways I have from exploring Italy. Hey, Italians, I will be back. I loved it out there. I am part Italian, so it was cool to be in the motherland. But ultimately, I think that those are 5 takeaways from learning from the Italians, the Italian culture, and how that I am hypothesizing they stay fit over the long term.